Okay, so this is not how we wanted to start the day.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Oh, yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you all so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks and get the reaction to injury news. Not what we were looking for. I'll talk about Jurrion Dickey, Dante Moore, and Justin Herbert all on today's show. And the scheduling debacle in college football. All on today's program, brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. The reports are out there from Pete Nakos on 3 and others that Trey McNutt has suffered a broken leg. So, expected timeline per J-Hop over at Scoop Duck, 6 to 12 weeks. Does this radically change Oregon's defense? Not necessarily. I talked about the defensive two deep on yesterday's show. You can go give that a listen or a watch if you haven't already. I didn't think McNutt would be a starter. Definitely could have seen him competing for playing time, and it wouldn't have shocked me if he was. I'd always be surprised by a true freshman stepping in and playing. DB, yeah, you can make it work. We've seen that over the last couple of years. McNutt was one of the top 30 players in the country coming into this 2025 cycle. He and Naeem Offord were the headline defensive back recruits in that elite defensive back haul this cycle, and he's going to be out for a while. So 6 to 12 weeks is what I think general expectation is. It's not expected to be a season-ending injury, but certainly this does put a little bit of a ding in Oregon's depth chart on the defensive side of the ball at a position group where Oregon's competing for a lot of different snaps. At least I would think. Maybe the coaching staff knew he wasn't going to be a starter coming into the year. Maybe they thought he was going to be a starter. But regardless, having Trey McNutt play does not appear to be an option for at least the first month of the season, probably a little bit more. The biggest thing that popped into my head, frankly, when I heard about this, I had a whole other really rosy, positive, uplifting segment for today's show. That's going to have to wait till later in the week. But my first thought when I heard about this news was, I hope this doesn't become a Justin Flowe situation. Safety is a position that I think Oregon has struggled to get a lot of production out of since Dan Lanning arrived. I think that they have recruited that position very heavily in the last couple cycles and in 2026 for good reason. Jet Washington, Devin Jackson, Xavier Larissa, the guys in 2026. Trey McNutt, though, is one of the most talented defensive back recruits from a rating standpoint that Oregon has ever had. And at the safety position, he's a guy who I think was competing for snaps this year, but my mind went to Justin Flowe. And Justin Flowe, probably the greatest example of what people would dub a five-star bust in Oregon history. Of the highest rated recruits of all time for the Ducks, Justin Flowe is the one who worked out the least, I think we would say. That, to me, was always more driven by injury than anything else, because he was a physical freak coming out of high school, and then he got hurt. And he was supposed to play in that 2020 season. You know, he and Dante Manning and Noah Sewell were five-star recruits, and Noah Sewell played as a true freshman. And it was supposed to be him and Flo and Kayvon Thibodeau and Dante Manning. And that was kind of, those were the highly rated guys, the five-star recruits that were going to be in that defensive era. And Flo just never panned out. He's at UNLV now, if you're curious. And Vontaze Burfict will be a defensive analyst on that staff. Make of that whatever you will. I think it's mostly humorous, but it is a little funny to think about. But anyway, Flo never, to me, looked the same after he got hurt, just physically. He was on the field. He's capable of being a productive player. And yeah, maybe there were other things that led to him not having the career that we all thought he might have when he first committed to the Ducks. And you watched his highlight film, which to this day is one of the craziest I've ever seen for a player at any position. I mean, he's just picking guys up left and right and body slamming them on the ground. And he wasn't playing in, a school with 2 million people and only 1A high school football. Like, he was a really, really highly rated prospect for a reason. So that's what I really hope doesn't happen here. Now, I don't know that good news is the right way to frame it. Let me say silver lining of sorts. If it is just a broken leg, that to me is not likely to linger unless there's a chance that, he get re-injured one day whenever his career actually does start. But, with a broken bone, that's better than having a ligament problem that could linger, that could never fully recover. Like, typically, I have no idea what kind of break it was, how it happened at practice, how severe it is, or anything like that. Just in my own experience with sports and injuries over my life, a broken bone is going to be a lot more likely to just set and then you be good to go and be back at 100% than if you tear a ligament in your ankle, you have to get that repaired, or like Damian Lillard is coming back from after this season, he's going to sit out, I think, ruptured Achilles. Like, that sort of thing can change your physical outlook. I really hope that doesn't happen here, and I'm at least optimistic that would be the case. So for this year, though, the name that popped into my head is, boy, you might need something from him at some point in time, was Aaron Flowers. And, Kingston Lopez, the guy who I think starts at safety alongside Dylan Thieneman on the back end. Aaron Flowers is a guy who had plenty of accolades coming out of 2024, was an All-America selection at the safety spot, and didn't play a heck of a lot last year, and showed some good things in the spring game. But I think he's someone that probably has a higher chance of playing now that Trey McNutt is not in the fold. I would think he's the most likely guy. And look, maybe it's an open battle. My suspicion that Kingston Lopez, one of your two starting safeties, is based on the fact that he saw real snaps as a true freshman last year. And it was later in the season, sure, but I think that's a spot where you now at least have a depth piece or a depth chart opening compared to what you might have had before. There is an opportunity. I think Aaron Flowers, I wouldn't forget the name Solomon Davis. I just throw it out there. He's not one of the bigger recruits Oregon's brought in the last few years, but he is still around on the roster and is someone who, from time to time, I think not this year's spring game 2025, but 2024, I think Davis led all Oregon players in tackles in that particular game. Just a name to think about that maybe pops up as a result of the injury. So I don't think this is a death blow to Oregon's defense, because even though safety is a big position of need for the Ducks from a production standpoint to be better than last year, I wasn't anticipating McNutt start as a true freshman, and I got more concerned about the long-term outlook, and I'm hoping that he's going to be able to come back, still be himself one day, because he's got all the tools to be a really, really good player. But this is definitely part of what makes fall camp and the lead up to his season nerve-wracking, because you don't know who it's going to be. I'm a Mariners fan, went through the same thing in spring training, and it was George Kirby, which was one of their 5 starting pitchers, far more impactful than Trey McNutt. So not good news as Oregon goes through fall camp, and hopefully they avoid more of these sorts of injuries, because remember last year, this is inevitable is not the word, but unheard of, definitely not. Players getting hurt at this stage in the lead up to the season. Last year it was Matthew Bedford, and that caused real issues on the field that almost led to a couple of horrifically bad upset losses at home. So this is not that. At least that's about the only positive I could spin. At least it's not that, but certainly not the news I was hoping to lead today's show with. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Hit me up on Twitter, all of that good stuff. What about another former 5-star who suffered an injury early in his career? Jurrion Dickey. I would love to see him pop off. First, this episode brought to you by our friends at Game Time. We've all been there, logging on early, waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show that you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping, and that is where Game Time comes in. Game Time makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime. You can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. And if you want to go to any type of show, frankly, I've been to a comedy show going through Game Time. I've been to the Big Ten Championship game. The experience was great. I got the ticket I needed, didn't have any problems, got a great deal, knew what to expect. Game Time is the way to go. Take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem that code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So before I give you the rest of today's show, I recorded it before the news broke about Jurrion Dickey, who, according to the Daily Emerald and Max Torres, has been suspended from the team, and it's not intended to be a permanent ordeal. We don't really know. But again, according to the Daily Emerald, there have been some relationship problems in the locker room and reports about getting into some altercations at practice and fights, and that has now moved into the suspension territory, and it's really unfortunate. It's not anything you ever want to hear with a young guy, especially one with so much potential. But anybody this age, frankly, like seeing him go through these sorts of struggles, I hope the temporary measure results in one day him having a phenomenal comeback that we say, hey, remember he was battling through, all this stuff and getting in fights, and that wasn't good. And now look at where his career is at. But there is a real possibility at this point, at least it seems to me, that the trajectory is headed towards he just never really has an Oregon career. That stinks. Mostly for him. I think Oregon's receiver room, as I've talked about a lot, is incredibly talented, incredibly deep. I think they'll be okay. I figured he'd be a part of the rotation this year, but I didn't think he'd be Oregon's number one receiver. We don't even know if the suspension will even last this season. Maybe he winds up playing this year. Maybe he figures it out. I don't know. I certainly hope he does. Most of all because guys that are this talented have an opportunity to set themselves and their families up for success down the line. I'd hate for him to squander that opportunity, and I'd also like for him to be a part of Oregon's receiver room one day because his potential is immense. So hopefully this starts going in the right direction, but overall, what a crappy news day. I mean, easily the worst news day that Oregon has had in quite some time. I mean, forget recruiting wins, a broken leg and a suspension, not the sort of news that you want to have. So wanted to pop in late at night and make sure that I gave you the up-to-date information with all of that as the reporting kind of settled down throughout the day and people figured out what was actually going on and all that sort of stuff. But that's the latest. So now we'll get back into the show that I recorded before all of this broke. This one came in as soon as I can find it in my notes. Daryl says, here is an SSA question for you, Spencer. Jurrion Dickey must have 600 yards receiving this year or he will transfer out. Curious to hear your thoughts on this. Actually pretty low for a couple of reasons. Number one, his brother is on the team. And I have heard that is a very serious thing for him to be on the same team. Now, Jurrion Dickey's not, I don't think ever going to be a major player for Oregon, but he is on the roster. And I think Jurrion values, he's a very family-driven guy. I've met him before. Really good dude. And I think being on the same team as his brother does hold a solid amount of value. So if that doesn't change, then I wouldn't think that Jurrion Dickey would be super likely to transfer. Reason number two, he didn't crack the rotation last year, but Will Stein at one point referred to last season really as his freshman year because he got injured his first year, which was 2023. And so last year was really his true freshman season. And, Will Stein has spoken before about how he still had to go through all the same adjustments that a lot of guys do, which is, there's an adjustment to college lifestyle, learning the playbook and getting all that stuff down while he was kind of rehabbing. So I think that extends out his timeline, because if you just, took a 30,000 foot view of the Oregon program, and you said, wow, a 5-star receiver who hasn't had a role at all going into his 3rd year, he's got to be a prime transfer candidate. Yeah, you would think that if you didn't have all the context of, what his career has been to this point, and the family component as well. I don't think he'd have to get to 600 yards, because I don't know how many wide receivers are going to get to 600 yards this year. Not that I don't think the passing game will be productive. I anticipate it doing very well. I just think the catches are going to be really spread out. I think without Evan Stewart in the fold, Dickey has more of an opportunity to step up. I think he's on the 2 deep. He was on the second team offense last year at receiver with Jeremiah McLaughlin and Kyler Casper when, Oregon had some blowout games last season. We saw what he did in the spring game. He posted a couple of Instagram pictures recently of him at fall camp, and he looks like he's able to make the acrobatic and athletic catches that, made him trend from a 4 to 5-star recruit coming out of high school a couple of cycles ago. So, it's not like I would be totally stunned if he goes out and has, 15 catches for 240 yards and 2 touchdowns and then transfers and he and his brother go somewhere else. Like, would that completely shock me? No. But this is a guy who, based on everything I've ever been told, really just likes being at Oregon. Plus, he's a big fisherman, which I'll say I've become an amateur dabbler in the fishing department as well, so I understand that. And there's a lot of great fishing in Oregon. I don't know you could fish in a lot of different places, but not everywhere. I don't know how much fishing you could find down in Tempe with Kenny Dillingham if he did that. So I'll put a 3 on that one. I think Dickey's a guy that is really, really committed to staying with the Ducks. And, player and talent retention has been a big focus for Oregon's NIL endeavors and this coaching staff. And that's shown up not just with guys like Dickey, but Kyler Casper's still here. Now, he got hurt last season, was going to have a more sizable role. But again, there are a lot of bodies, a lot of talent in that receiver room to compete with. And, the fact that they're both still here, I think says something about their commitment to Oregon and willingness to really give it a chance and not just say, I'm not playing here, I'm going to go somewhere else. So I'll give that one a 3. Matthew sends one in. Okay, I have an SSA take. By the way, grammatically, look, I'm picky. It would be an SSA take. Or if you write the acronym SSA, because that, S starts with which is a vowel sound, it would be an SSA take, but it's also a consonant, so I guess it would be a SSA take. A Spencer Scale of Agreement take or an SSA take. Anyway, maybe a hot one, but I think we have a 10 to 11 win season, but Dante doesn't finish the season. Whoa. He plays decent enough to win the first few games, but not great. Lays an egg against Penn State. Novosad comes in, and Herbert, circa 2016, comes in and takes it over. Also, being a Raider fan, our center in Jackson Powers Johnson would have something to say about being forgotten. Yeah, I should never stop hearing about that one. That is the biggest trivia whiff of my entire life. I don't think I'll have a bigger one than that, frankly. So, and we'll have more trivia on today's show. A 10-11 win season. Well, I'm with you there. I'm at a 9 on a 10 to 11 win season part of it. But Dante doesn't finish the year. I can see a scenario where Dante Moore doesn't start at the end of the year because I've seen him do it in his career where he plays poorly enough to where you got to put the backup in. But it wouldn't happen the way you're describing. So this is a 1.5 for me. If Dante Moore goes out and Oregon's 4-0, meaning they're in the top 10 because they're number 7 in the AP poll, they're 4-0, going to number 2 Penn State, and then lays an egg, that's not the game where you pull him. I think that if he goes out and succeeds early on and then struggles against Penn State, Oregon then has a bye, they come back home and play Indiana the following week. If that game goes awry, then you can have a serious discussion. I think it would have to be a 3-game stretch of prolonged and profound struggles for Dante Moore specifically, for him to not be the starter this year, which, what he did at UCLA, that fits the bill, right? He threw, I think, 9 interceptions on the year. He had a pick 6 in 3 straight games. If he goes 3 straight games with multiple turnovers and it's resulting in Oregon losses and, a couple of them have been returned for touchdowns, then you probably give Austin Novosad a spell and see what he can do at quarterback. I'm not anticipating that. I'm just saying that's what it would take to me. You'd have to see several games, not, we struggled against Penn State, he's coming out. No, I don't. I do not foresee that being the situation. So that's a 1.5. Number one Duck fan sends this one in. Little throwback. Do you think if Justin Herbert wins the game on November 23rd against Arizona State, he wins the Heisman Trophy and the first half was set up so they lose? He was very clutch in the second half. Well, it was it was not a good day from Herbert or Oregon in general. They still should have won the game, but 3rd and 16. Instead, they go win the Pac-12 championship anyway, win the Rose Bowl, and that's instead of going to the playoff where they would have gotten smacked by LSU. I mean, smacked by who I think is the best college football team of all time. Herbert wasn't going to hit 4,000 passing yards that season. He didn't, as a matter of fact, and the numbers do matter. Like, he had a 32-6 touchdown interception ratio. That's great. He was 67% completion. Joe Burrow was winning that Heisman. That game was not the difference. So even if he does win the Arizona State game that year, they do not go beat LSU. So this is rarely seen. Rarely seen. No, I'll give it a 1. I'll give it a 1. It's not. Yeah, Joe Burrow was really. Joe Burrow went for over 6,000 yards and 60 touchdowns. Pretty sure were his numbers that year. Let me see. That 2019 season, 5,600 yards, 60 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. So, that just was never going to happen because of the offense Oregon was running at the time. But now they've got Dan Lanning and Will Stein, and it's better. All right. Trivia is going to arise, but a thought on the Oregon State game again. So I was talking about the Oregon State game yesterday, and I am a huge fan of continuing the matchup, continuing the rivalry. It'll probably take a break in 2026. I wish it wouldn't. I'd rather play Oregon State than Boise State. I'm more worried about the Broncos. I mean, Oregon beat Boise for the first time last year, and look at what it took. It was messy, ugly, weird. Oregon should have won by more, but then they fumbled on 2 possessions in a row that led to 14 Boise State points. They couldn't stop Ashton Jeanty because few really could. And then all of a sudden, Oregon needed to go kick a game-winning field goal. Shout out Atticus Sappington. But I'd rather play next year's non-conference schedules: Portland State, Boise State, and at Oklahoma State in the return trip to Stillwater. I'd rather play Oregon State than Boise. I think the Beavs could be good. Like, if you're going from a strength of schedule standpoint, you'd rather play Boise. That does more for you in that realm than Oregon State probably does, depending on how the Beavs do this year. But just from a personal standpoint, I'd rather play the Beavs. But Bill sent this one in. Bill, just a man after my own heart here. This thought came to my mind, and it's something I thought about every year. Why do they make the schedules before the end of the previous season? I've always wondered about that. Bill, my man, this is a great question. Do you know why? Because this, for those of you that listen to my Locked On College Football show, you know it's something I have railed against for years, and I'm going to continue doing it until something changes, because it makes no sense. The idea that future schedules have to be set so far in advance is absurd, ridiculous. It is rooted in, I guess, not so much tradition as that's how we've always done it. There is no reason. Oregon State and Washington State quickly assembled their schedules last year and this year, which proves that if you just have the will and determination to go and set a football schedule going into a year, you can do it. It's just, well, it's not the way we do it, but no one actually understands why, least of all me. So this format, by the way, is going to result in the Civil War not being played in 2026, which I don't care for. I hope it gets picked back up for 2027 and beyond. The Apple Cup got scheduled, Washington and Washington State's rivalry game. They're playing this year and every year through the 2030s or so. I think that's great. I hope the Beavs and the Ducks are able to do the same thing. But the answer to your question, Bill, why do they schedule it that way? Because college football is a great and wonderful sport. I always say on my Locked On College Football show, it's the greatest sport on planet Earth. And it doesn't make sense a lot of the time. And it's weird, and it's crazy, and it's bizarre. And sometimes that makes it great, and sometimes it makes you want to pull your hair out. I wish they would schedule it every year. I would like for the 4 power conferences to do a rotating 2-year home-and-home matchup based on the prior year's conference standings. You just have to get the same number of teams into those conferences, which shouldn't be very hard to do. Realignment happens all the time, of course. And then this year, for example, if this were year 1, let's say you did the Big Ten and SEC. Oregon, as the reigning Big Ten champ, would play a 2-year home-and-home with Georgia because they were the SEC champ. So this year they'd play in Eugene, next year they'd play in Athens, and then it would rotate. Let's say Oregon, so that would be 25 and 26. Let's say in 2026, Oregon's won the Big Ten again, and it rotates to the ACC. And Miami's the reigning ACC champ. You would have a 2-year home-and-home with the Hurricanes. Who wouldn't want that? This all has to stem from a governing body, though, that tells schools what to do. Schools currently get to set their own non-conference schedules, which is patently absurd. Then you get situations like what Indiana did. They had a home-and-home with Virginia in the future. They canceled it so that they could play easy games and be undefeated going into their conference slate. That's horrible for college football. I don't agree with it whatsoever. So I want to equalize the 4 leagues and then rotate, and so it's balanced. You get the home and home, and you'll get some natural fluctuations where, yeah, these 2 teams were conference champions 2 years ago. Now they're fighting to be 8-win programs. It can create all sorts of interesting storylines, takes the power out of the schools, creates quality matchups for fans to watch, and for television executives who are kind of running the sport in many regards to have every single year. That's what I would like to see happen. So, is it going to? No. Is it a good idea? I think so. I think it's a really good idea. And if you just, and by the way, I'll even grant this concession. I just want that for 1 Power 4 non-conference game, and I want everyone to play 9 conference games. Standardize that. With the other 2 games, do whatever you want. Play a couple of Group of 5 teams. Play another Power 4 school if you really want to go through a gauntlet. Play a couple of Group of 5 teams. Do whatever. That allows schools like Colorado and Colorado State to have an opportunity. Oregon State, Washington State, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, that's one of the ways I'd fix college football. But they don't ask. Well, yeah, they don't ask me. Some people do listen and have been made aware of my proposal, and now you all are too. So let's get to trivia for today. I just realized I forgot to put the trivia from yesterday, and I don't fully remember what it was. I'm pretty sure I got it. I think I got it right. Yeah, I should probably fix that. Give me a second. Okay, now I've been given a second. Just wanted to confirm that I had the answer. So I was correct yesterday that Oregon State is the team they're 17-8 against, and Washington 17-7. But and the COVID year was a part of it. But Oregon played Washington twice in 2023, but didn't play them in 2001. So okay, that's where we're at. I mean. That's pretty. I got the teams right. Got most of the reason. That's a pretty good answer. Not a perfect answer, sure. I think that's a pretty good trivia answer there. So that brings us to today. A couple questions here. Trivia question for you. What former Duck had the longest NFL career? The longest. It could be an old name. You know who I'm going with? Because he was around for a while. I'm going to go with Kellen Clemens. Kellen Clemens was holding a clipboard on the sideline for a long time. I'm gonna go with Kellen Clemens here. Here's a fun one. We all know that Bo and Tez Johnson were brothers. If you hadn't heard, now you know. Name the 15 other brother combos to play on the Ducks. 15. This is why it is fortuitous Jurrion Dickey was asked about on today's show, because he and his brother Juwan, those two count. So there's one. You've got Patrick and Justin Herbert. That's 2. Dawson and Bailey Jaramillo. That's 3. Naeem Offord and Mekhi Hughes. That's 4. Elijah and Cruz rushing right now. That's 5. Troy and Travis Dye. That's 6. I'm just trying to go through eras in my head and think of brother combinations that would have been on there. It's tough. Can I get the I don't know if I'm going to be able to get to 15 here, especially not in a reasonable amount of time to end today's show. I'm decently happy that I'm already at 6. Who else? Other brothers that were on. Gosh, that's difficult. Very, very difficult. Kenyon and LaMichael seem like they're brothers, but obviously they're not. Gosh, I might only be able to get to 6. I feel like there's an obvious one that I'm missing somewhere. There's got to be. There's always an obvious one that I'm missing somewhere, as any Raiders fan in the world who's also an Oregon fan would tell me. Was there Williams, any of those secondaries in the late 2000s? Were there any younger brothers of Royce Freeman or Thomas Tyner or Darren Thomas? No. Darren and DeAnthony were not related, so no. Boy, that's did Jeff and Mitchell Schwartz ever play together? Okay, yeah, I'll put the Schwartz brothers in there. I think that's all I can get to. Any other ones that really, really stand out? No, that's it. That's 7. That's 7, I think. So let me know who the other 8 are if those 7 are indeed correct. So that's it for today's show. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. Until then, hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.